Okay, we are recording.
Oh, hello, and welcome to FlickHeads. I'm Dom,
And I'm Des.
and we're here today to talk about Back to the Future. As you can see, one of our favourite movies with all the many collections behind us, and one of our favourite movies from 1985. Growing up with this movie from childhood and made a major impact in our lives. And what do you think, Des?
Yep, we've talked off air about when we first seen the movie, which none of us which we can't quite recall, and we both remember the most recent time we watched the movie, and it's one of those films that's always been there, and it's so integrated into our past and into pop culture as a whole, and it's just an amazing movie, and it's a great one to talk about on our first episode of our podcast.
Yes, I think there's no better movie to talk about other than one of our favorite ones. So, I think we'll start with how the concept came about and how Eric Stoltz was the original cast member for Marty McFly, if you remember that story.
No, you can tell me that one.
So Michael J. Fox was filming Family Ties at the time for CBS, and uh, they wanted Michael J. Fox originally, but he was tied up with that show and couldn't get away. So they originally hired Eric Stoltz to play Marty McFly, but after about 2 weeks of filming, which you can probably find some outtakes on YouTube and stuff of him actually playing the role, they weren't happy with his performance, and they decided to wait for Michael J. Fox, and he then ended up filming both things simultaneously. He was filming Family Ties during the day and Back to the Future in the evening, and that became what we know now as Back to the Future, and we wouldn't have it any other way.
I know it's hard to imagine Back to the Future without Michael J. Fox, and we'll never know. But would it be what it is today with a different actor? Would it be this sort of iconic film series if it hadn't had Michael J. Fox in it?
I think the fact that the producers and the directors wanted Michael J. Fox from the start, they must have known he was the right person for the job. And as you say, we couldn't imagine anyone else playing that role. But in Back to the Future in Back to the Future universe, maybe there is another one where Eric Stoltz is Marty McFly. Just watch The Flash, and you'll see in the alternate universe, Eric Stoltz is Marty McFly, and everyone believes he is.
Well, it can stay in that universe because in mine it has to be Michael J. Fox. He's the only one, and he's one of a number of.
He's the one and only, and we can't just dwell on Michael J. Fox. I mean, you've got Christopher Lloyd playing Doc Brown, who is one of the most iconic characters in pop culture history. He has created some of the most memorable lines. Would you like to say one? Great Scott!
my thoughts went straight to Crispin Glover. Whenever you said Christopher Lloyd, Crispin Glover in Back to the Future, I think is overlooked. I think his character is fantastic, and I'm shocked I haven't seen him in more things over the years because I absolutely loved his performance in Back to the Future.
Well, saying you haven't seen him in more things, he maybe hasn't been as big, but he was actually in another time travel movie. Can you name it?
No,
Hot Tub Time Machine.
Hot Tub Time Machine. Well, let's come up off air. So remind me about that movie. I'm sure I've seen it, but remind me about
it. So I just know he's in it.
Well, let's move on. We are a couple of movie buffs that know nothing about Hot Tub Time Machine, but that's okay. It's one of a number of movies that references Back to the Future or is inspired by Back to the Future, isn't that right?
Yes, in all seriousness. So Hot Tub Time Machine, 13 going on 30, and there was another one I was thinking of, but these type of films all reference characters going to interact with their younger selves.
Mhm.
So you can see where Back to the Future has influenced a host of movies and TV shows and music and just pop culture in general. And the fact that it's still relevant today says something about the longevity of the film and how beloved it is especially towards people our age, because we are constantly referencing it or making jokes or watching it. Or, I mean, you watch it 3-4 times a year, don't you?
Yeah, I do certainly. And when you say our age, you mean like mid-20s, right? Nobody believes
Mid-20s to
that.
40s.
Yes, I've 3 children, and they've all went through phases where they're told to sit down in front of the TV and watch what I tell them to watch, and they're all thankful for it. And my youngest, is now would list. I'll let her away with this, but she'd list Back to the Future 3 as one of her favorite movies. We'll not get into that debate about
Back
which
to the
one's
Old
better.
West.
We all know the answer to which of the 3 is the best. But she loves the movie. We watched the movie series together twice in the last 2 years. It is a great movie. Do you want to move on to talking about the movie, about some of the scenes? What jumps into your? What's the first thing that comes to mind, or what in particular would you like to discuss?
Two of my favorite scenes is the Enchantment Under the Sea dance. I just love when Marty's there trying to get his parents together, but Biff is trying to stop them, and he's in the car with his parents, but George is inside, and he's trying to get them together. And the other scene I love is the clock tower, when Doc Brown is trying to get it right by the stroke of midnight, so the lightning strike hits the clock tower, and we can see it going 88 miles an hour. And do you know why? Do you know why?
I have to pick up on this because if anybody watches this podcast, this will be in the comments. Of course, it wasn't midnight, was it? Was it 10:04? Was it 10:04 p.m.?
10:04?
Yeah, or 9:04? It certainly wasn't midnight. Put it in the comments what you think time it is, and we'll add a comment underneath whenever we clarify. It certainly wasn't midnight. I know that much.
Well. Do you know why the DeLorean goes 88 miles an hour?
No, I don't know. If it actually goes 88 miles an hour, that is.
Well,
they're not the most reliable cars in the world. We'll get on to that later. Oh, he's gone. This is what happens.
This is what happens when you're live and you have technical problems. But don't worry, it's only our first episode, and I kicked the table. So, it goes 88 miles an hour was the producers and director thought it was an easy number to remember, and it wasn't super fast for a family film that it had to go 180 miles an hour. And it was also the top speed of the DeLorean, which was made here in Belfast.
Yes, top speed, not the most reliable cars in the world, and there's a long story for another podcast by another group of people about DeLorean and the reasons behind the DeLorean factory being placed in Belfast. And you know, it didn't last long. Let's say it was only around, I think 1981, 1982 were the only 2 years. I can be corrected in that, but it is an iconic car, even if there are only a few thousand made. Even if it had its flaws, it is an iconic car, and we're proud it's in Belfast, even though there were some issues with it.
Like the Titanic.
I was going to bring up Titanic because it was also made in Belfast. We do make some good things in Belfast. We're actually a great spot for international movies, Hollywood movies being filmed in Belfast. That's not a discussion for another podcast, but Belfast is a happening place. But in the past, it has its past, and one of those things was the DeLorean factory.
And that's what we're talking about today, is the past of Back to the Future. So the DeLorean is an iconic car. Me and you have been lucky enough to actually see one in person and get our pictures taken with it. And the hoverboard as well.
Yep, and that was back in 2015, which any Back to the Future fan will know was an important year.
Because October 21st was Back to the Future Day in 2015. That was the day that Marty McFly went to.
Yeah, and that was the second movie, of course, where he traveled into the future. And we had a big celebration, and can't believe that was 10 years ago, because this is the 40th anniversary year in
Oh my God.
2025. I know, that's it. And we both look so young for being 80s.
We still do. I couldn't get the 1.21 gigawatts out of the DeLorean when I saw it, though. It was.
No, well, that would have been shocking.
Well,
I'm just
very
going
good.
to touch on a couple of my favorite scenes. So, to me, the opening scene where the skateboard rolls up to the plutonium box, which, of course, first time you watch the movie, you wouldn't know why. You wouldn't know anything about the yellow box under the bed. He rolls it up to that, and then all the clocks are ticking in the background. And he hooks up the amps, and he turns the dial, and then he turns another dial, and the bass and the treble, and then he plugs it into his guitar, and then he turns the volume up on it, and then the constant switch flicking before he strikes down on the silver plectrum and gets blown across the studio. Brilliant scene, brilliant opening to a movie, and even that extends beyond after the doc calls him and he hops on a skateboard when he realizes he's late from school. That's all opening credits, but it is an iconic.
It's iconic and it's fascinating, especially when you don't know and you've watched it for the first time and you're sort of jealous of people watching it for the first time because they're in for a great wild ride. It reminds me, that opening scene reminds me, and I assume this movie took influence from Back to the Future, but at the beginning of Wayne's World, they have switching on the amps, and then when they play the guitar, they play it so loud it blows the doors off their garage where they're filming their TV show.
Yeah,
I don't know if you've seen.
It must have taken some influence because it was made a few years after Back to the Future. Am I right?
Yeah, there's plenty of movies that have taken influence from Back to the Future. Even the time travel concept has been replicated many times over. I might have touched on them earlier with regards to 13 Going on 30 and Hot Tub Time Machine and Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure and things like that. These are all movies coming after Back to the Future, but taking references or ideas or things that we saw in Back to the Future and using them a different way.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the trilogy, do you think the stuff that was predicted, how much stuff do you think that was predicted has come true?
Well, we're still waiting on flying cars, aren't we? I know there's a few prototypes out there, but from 2015, there were no flying cars, there were no hoverboards, but and we certainly don't have. Is it Jaws 20 something was referenced in the second movie?
Is it
Thankfully,
Jaws 18?
They stopped Jaws 18. Thankfully, they stopped making Jaws movies. Great movie though. Maybe one for another podcast.
Another one, yeah.
While we're talking about that, if anybody has any ideas for a movie for us to discuss, doesn't have to be an 80s movie. It can be a modern one. It can be an off-the-cuff one. Whatever you think. If you think it's worth discussing, let us know. We will add it to the list, and we'll watch it and we'll discuss it. No problem.
Or give us a movie that we haven't seen, and we'll sit down and watch it, and then we'll discuss it on the next episode or a future episode. Just going back to the predictions that was made in the original trilogy. So I might have made some notes from the last time I watched it. So things that they did get right. So video calls. Ta-da! Yep. We are on video call now.
We're doing it right now.
Ting. If we had sound effects, there'd be a big ping come up. Wearable tech. We now have wearable tech.
Yep.
Biometric tech they had in it.
Yep.
Yeah,
That's
and
right.
we now have biometric tech for our phones and our iPhones, and using your face to open your phones. They had drones given out
Remind me what thing had the drone.
in Back to the Future 3, Back to the Future 2. I think the drones were given out. Were making deliveries in one of the
Right.
scenes.
Excellent.
They have tablets in Back to the Future 2.
Tablet computers, do you mean?
Yep. They were taking notes on the tablets to save the clock tower, and they were taking donations via tablet.
Of course. So you had electronic payments from your was it from your thumbprint?
I think that's where the biometric.
We're kind of there, aren't we? I know that thumbprints do open the door, but thumbprints make payments. I'd say we're very close to that, because you open your phone with your thumb and then you use your phone to make your payment. So yeah,
Yep.
It's another accuracy, isn't it?
So there was a lot more predictions that came true than I thought, because the first thing when we say about predictions, there's no flying cars, or we don't have self-tying shoes. But when you sit down and think about it, there's Sorry?
I've reached an age in my life where I would like power laces. I would like to tie within my shoe, and I don't want to have to bend over and get a sore back tying my shoelace.
But
I know there was
you're only 20.
Oh, of course.
They also had flat screen TVs.
Yep.
And they also had VR, virtual reality. That came through.
The scene sitting at the table, which reminds me of something else that they've missed. I'd be the pessimistic one, you'd be the optimistic one. But Marty McFly's son was wearing the VR headset at the dinner table. But do you remember what they ate at the dinner table?
Was it hydrated food?
Yeah, they rehydrated a pizza in 10 seconds.
Yeah.
Why are we not there? Why can I not have well, it was a Pizza Hut, Domino's, insert whatever kind of pizza you like here. Why can I not throw that in the hydrator and pizza in 10 seconds? Get on that one, Domino's.
Get on that one, Pizza Hut. Well, funny enough, hydrated food was one of the ones that didn't come true, but there is a form of hydrated food which is used for space travel, or like armies who have to go out into wars and obviously can't go to Pizza Hut. But they're the only sort of examples of hydrated food that I could find at the minute. But so while it is kind of reality, it's not a reality that they had predicted, because we don't have Pizza Hut hydrated pizzas in a second. We don't have flying cars.
No.
We don't have hoverboards.
One thing I'm glad we don't have.
Sorry?
One thing I'm glad we don't have is a fax machine in every room.
Yes, you beat me to it, because they predicted there would be a fax machine everywhere. They would be taking over the world. But yes, we don't have fax machines everywhere. We don't have weather control where they can control what the weather is.
Oh yes, was it accurate predictions, or were they controlling the weather?
I think they were able to control it.
Right.
I think they were able to type in and control what they wanted. Weather predictions have got better, obviously, with technology and time, but we still can't control what the weather is. Although some people might argue.
Well, I'm not going to say, let's not open that debate.
Yeah, we don't have automated gas stations, although we do have self-service gas stations or petrol stations here. But we don't have automated where robots come out and fill up your car.
Well, that's not completely correct, because there are electric cars that have fully automated battery replacement cycles, where you drive into the garage, robots take the battery out, and robots put a new battery back in. So you're refueling an electric car. That's a whole other debate, which you don't want to get into.
Point taken.
But it is the technology exists. It's probably just too expensive to have fully automated, gas stations or petrol stations, depending on what side of the world you're on.
And finally, the fashion that they had predicted in the trilogy, there was metallic caps, and there was double ties. They had 2 knots. But some fashions come and go, but unfortunately they didn't catch on.
Yeah.
So when you think about it, there's a lot that got right.
Mm-hmm.
You know, with wearable tech, flat screen TVs, biometrics, VR, tablets, all that stuff. And at the time, it seemed unbelievable. And you're
Mm-hmm.
talking about the pizza. That seemed unbelievable at the time and still is. But maybe in the future, you'll have your wish where you can get a Pizza Hut in 10 seconds
In the future, mate. In the
in the
future.
future. But it was when you look back and you think, flip, they did get some of that right. Like,
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Wanted to dive back into the movie here. There's a few things that you talked earlier about when people watch it for the first time. Obviously, when we watched it for the first time, we were children. So there's certain things that as a child you just don't pick up in movies, or I certainly didn't. And I was probably in my 20s rewatching it whenever I started to appreciate some of the things. Like, for example, at the beginning of the movie, when the time machine's first unveiled, but to Marty, they are at Twin Pines Mall.
yep.
But growing up, I never noticed the reference that later on. So shortly after that scene, when he first travels back, there's two pine trees outside the barn, and Marty knocks one of them down. And the guy references his pines. You killed my pine, and that's fine. It's good fun. It was Twin Pines Mall. He knocked down the pine tree. But at the end of the movie, when he travels back to the future, the mall is named Lone Pine Mall. Now, I never noticed that as a teenager. I never noticed that probably the first few times I watched it, and I remember a real appreciation for the effort that goes into lines like that. But without drawing too much attention to it, it's like let the viewer find this for themselves. They didn't
Yes,
say
I think
Lone Pine Mall. It was just slightly off camera as the camera was facing down to the scene where the doc's being shot, and it just says Lone Pine Mall there. I love that. I love references like that.
yes, I think that's fascinating how they incorporated little Easter eggs like that into the movie, and they let the viewer find it rather than making a point of it. It's just such a subtle reference. And as you say, as a child or a young teenager watching it, you're enjoying the movie for what it is at the time, but you're never really fully taking note of those tiny details. And it's only when on repeated watches you notice something else. And that's the beauty of the trilogy overall, but especially the first film. Every time you watch it, no matter how many times, you can repeat the lines, everything, but you'll always notice something. Oh, I didn't notice that before. Oh, that's class. I didn't see that. Or just all the things that make it such a heartfelt, warm family comedy, but it's sci-fi at the same time. So when you see things like Lone Pine Mall and Twin Pine Mall, you appreciate those things as an older viewer. And maybe for us, it's the nostalgia of every time we watch it and we notice something else, or we can repeat what we hear on the screen. I think just the effort that has went into creating those wee Easter eggs is phenomenal.
Yeah. There's a few other things that have just popped into my mind while you've been talking there. So one of them is when Marty is looking for Doc's house in 1955, and he's getting directions from the guy in the diner, and he
Yeah.
says that's just after John F. Kennedy Drive, and the guy in the diner says, "Who the hell is John F. Kennedy?" I love that. I love that little reference to something that is in the future for 1955, but of course in the past for 1985. Another one is when Marty's trying to convince George McFly
Yeah.
to take Louis into the dance, and he breaks into his house. He puts the headphones and plays the rock music, and he says, I am Darth Vader from the
And
planet
of course the
Fulton,
Star Wars
whatever it is."
reference.
But of course, yeah, the Star Wars reference, because of course in 1955, Darth Vader didn't exist.
No.
Not
And,
no.
and again and again there are things that you probably wouldn't have necessarily picked up on first watch. And I think that's why the movie lives on and is so popular today, because someone will pick that up today, a young person today will watch it and they'll enjoy the references from Star Wars because most people do love Star Wars. And then, but even today, would they pick up on it in first go, or would they have to have repeated watches to pick up on these small bits of information? I mean, we know this because we've watched it many times. One of my favorite scenes isn't it when he goes back to 1955 and he asks for a Diet Pepsi?
Oh, yes.
And they don't have Diet Pepsi in 1955, isn't that right?
Yeah, he said that he asked for a Diet Pepsi, and then he
Or a
asked for a
7 Up
tab,
free.
or a Pepsi free. That's what it is. He
Pepsi
asked for a
free, that's
Pepsi
what it
free.
was. Sorry, I beg your pardon.
He says, "You want a Pepsi, pal? You're gonna have to pay for it."
That's it.
And then he asked, "Can I have a tab?" Which of course would have been a sugar-free tab cola from the 80s.
Yeah.
Just to have a tab, and he says, "I can't give you a tab unless you order something." And then he says, "Give me something without any sugar." Do you remember what he serves it?
No,
A
tell
cup of
me.
tea. There's a cup of tea down on the table.
Those scenes just make me laugh, and just every time you watch them, they're just such good fun. But I think the more you watch it, the more you'll find wee Easter eggs like that. And if any of our viewers want to watch it and point out any more that we have missed or that you have noticed and you want to tell us, then just leave a comment below and we can expand on them.
Yeah, so this is a new podcast. It's our first episode. We're two movie buffs, but we don't know, first of all, if anybody's going to watch this, and if they don't, then that's fine. But if people do watch it, we don't know what age, what demographic will be. We don't know if we're going to get viewers who have already seen this movie, for example, a dozen times, and who can jump into the comments and say, "Oh, I love this, you missed that. Why did you not talk about this?" But there's also the potential that a couple of people will watch this podcast who have not seen the movie, who are much younger than us and who haven't been introduced to this movie in the way that I've introduced my children to the movies. So if you haven't watched Back to the Future, well, I hope you haven't watched this far and had it spoiled. But honestly, some movies from the 70s and 80s we watch nowadays and we go, that just didn't age well. But that cannot be said about Back to the Future. Back to the Future, all three of the movies, the trilogy, but especially the first movie, it has aged so well. It's still such an enjoyable movie to watch. Well, 40 years later.
Yes, and one of my favorite directors, Kevin Smith, I was actually listening to a podcast the other day, and he made a reference to Back to the Future, and he said something which really kind of hit home. He says, as adults, we live in the past and look to the future, but we don't live in the moment. And you and me, Des, we always talk about 80s movies or things we did in the past or what we're going to do in the future, but we never actually sit down and talk about today. And I think that's kind of relevant of life today with our fast moving technological life. Things just move so fast. We don't sit down to take stock of what we're doing at that moment in time. We're always looking past going, oh, I remember things were so good in the 80s, or we're going to do this in 5 years' time or next year, but we never think and take stock and actually appreciate what we've got now. So this is part of the reason for this podcast, is to actually sit down and take some time and talk about our favorite movies and live in the moment and do things that we've been talking about doing for years but never got around to doing. So, I mean, if you've made it this far into the podcast and you're enjoying it, as Des said, this is our first podcast, so there's going to be a few things that maybe don't gel right or whatever, but just give us a few pointers or a few notes below how we could improve, or if any ideas for future movies, and we'll take it from there.
That's it. And just don't roast us too bad, because it is our first podcast. We are genuinely looking for constructive feedback. We're also discussing whether we would move the podcast so we're both in the same room. We'll be looking at microphone setups and stuff like that. So if there's an issue with sound quality, don't be afraid to be honest with us and give us some feedback. And if you're an avid podcast watcher, we particularly want to hear your feedback. And as Dom said, movie suggestions. Dominic did just mention the director that he's a big fan of, and we've talked about our second episode being the 4:30 movie.
Yes, the 4:30 movie, and typically, while I'm not going to go into it now, it's set in the 80s. So we're going back again, but that's a discussion for another day.
That's it. So that's just to let you know, if you like this episode 2 is going to be talking about the 4:30 movie, which is a 2024 movie, but set back in the 80s. So you can tell where our hearts lie in the 80s, but we also do love modern cinema. We love all sorts of films. So I'm more than happy.
Finally, if anything behind you want to talk about behind me, just put a comment below and say what's that set.
You want to take a minute to show a few of your things?
I could show the Back to the Future stuff.
Yeah.
So obviously we have a sports almanac where I get all the tips for the future, and then go back
for 2025 in there.
I've not 25. No, I've already ate my Back to the Future cereal. It felt like 1980s when I was eating it.
You know, I seen a post on social media about imagining you were being back in the 80s with your bowl of cereal in front of the cartoons. Here we are living in the past game, but maybe that's how you felt when you were eating that cereal.
That's exactly how I felt, only I didn't have cartoons on at the time. This is my holy grail of Back to the Future. You can see it's the 35th anniversary box set, and I won't go into everything in it, but as you can see, it's set up like a VHS, and it has hundreds of stuff inside. Just the flux capacitor, the Hill Valley Times of the newspaper from 1955 and from 1985, and all these wee tidbits from the movie that just make it a bit more realistic when you're watching it, and you can feel you're a part of it. And we have the continuity script as well. So I mean, I'm happy enough to show people a lot more if they wanted me to break down what was in the box set. But I'll not go all into it now. But that is my favorite box set, and obviously it has the movies and steelbook with the favorite some picture on the back.
It has an iconic picture.
Sorry?
That is an iconic picture.
It really is, and it's my favorite box set. So I would never sell it. And then I have backup copies up here just in case I lose this one, or I lose the box of plutonium.
Yeah, we think you have enough copies of the movie there. That's for sure.
Well, I think it's my favorite movie, so you can never have too many copies. But they are some of my versions, and there's plenty more versions out there. I actually do have another version. I've just remembered. If I can just find it here. Oh.
So you can see that Dom is the collector here.
Back to the Future Japanese edition.
Japanese edition.
Japanese.
Do you speak Japanese?
I can't read the Japanese, but I assume that says Back to the Future.
Yeah, probably though. We could probably work that bit out.
But there you go. That is a few of my Back to the Future box sets, movies, editions.
Any closing thoughts on the movie?
Closing thoughts is that I think it's just such an iconic movie that we have lived our lives through, that we will continue to enjoy, watch, quote, and always recommend to younger viewers to watch and just be part of the phenomenon that is Back to the Future.
Yeah, that's it. I'll not add anything to that because we both are in complete agreement. And it was a great movie and an obvious movie to a certain extent to choose for our first podcast. So if you liked the podcast, hopefully you'll be tuning in for our second one. And the plan at the minute is to put out an episode a week. That may change as we discuss movies, as people view or don't view. But we're going to keep putting the episodes out because, if nothing else, we enjoy chatting to each other and discussing movies. So if you're watching, let us know. If you can follow, subscribe, all those things, interact with the video. If for no other reason, just so we know people are enjoying the content and we know where people are watching from as well. Because obviously,
Yes, let us know where you're from in the world and what you're watching from, and don't forget to say hi if you enjoy this movie. If you enjoy this podcast and the movie.
Yes. And we'll leave it at that. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
I'm Dave.
Bye.
All the best. So we're still recording, but I'm ending the recording now.
Are you ending it, or are you come back to the future?
All the best, everyone.